I really admire people who knew what they wanted to do their whole life. I had dinner with Martin Vero last night, and he told me since the age of 7 he wanted to be a sculptor, and look what he's done. The incredible sculpture around here. And I was never like that, or Alexander Tsiaris, who knew he wanted to be a Macedonian goat herder from childhood. Well, I wasn't like that. I never really knew what I wanted to do. And I was a good student, but I was better with my hands, and I ended up becoming a carpenter, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. And so when I finished college, I got a job as a carpenter, and my parents were worried because they didn't think there was any money in that. So they thought, just apply to medical school, and see if you get in. So I applied. I didn't get in. I did get on the waiting list, but I still had my job as a carpenter. So remember the day I was in my van, had a job out in Utah. I was driving down the driveway, and my mother comes running out. She says, "Mark, wait. What, Mom, what? It's medical school on the phone." So they called. I had gotten in on the waiting list, and she said, "Well, look, why don't you just come in, we'll think about it, talk about it." And sure enough, convinced me to try it out. So one thing led to another, and if someone had told me, 20 years ago that I was going to be a spa doctor, I would have laughed because it was the farthest thing from my mind. But it turns out that it's been a very interesting journey. And I probably traversed more medicine than any other doctor in history because I started off in primary care as an internal medicine doctor. Then I went into acute care in the intensive care unit. I went into emergency medicine, and here I worked in inner cities in clinics. And now here I am at Canyon Ranch. So I think I've got the broadest experience and perspective that any other doctor could possibly have. And I love it. It's a great place. People come for checkups and get healthy and learn how to eat right. And if food is medicine, then I think we all could probably take better medicine. It's interesting because if food is medicine, I really think that different people need different medicine. It just doesn't make sense that everybody, all humans, should eat the same diet. Pretty sure that an Eskimo diet is good for an Eskimo, and Mediterranean diet is good for a Greek. But I'm not sure that everybody else should be on exactly the same diet. So as you can imagine, people come to Canyon Ranch and they want to lose weight. And I've seen just about all the diets, everybody's own particular diet. Now you've got the Zone and the Ornish diet and the medical diets. You've even got the Subway diet and the drive-through diet now. So you've got these amazing range of diets, and I've seen them all because people come in and they tell me they've had this experience with this diet and they lost weight on Atkins and they put it back and they went on the Zone diet and they went to the South Beach, and this rotating idea of trying different diets until something works. I think a lot of us have had an experience with that, and we've maybe had some success, tried something else, we gained the weight back, try it again. And wouldn't it be better if we had a way to really figure out what diet was best for us? So we started investigating this at Canyon Ranch, and it intrigued me, and what's always driven me in my work has been curiosity. In fact, I started at Canyon Ranch 15 years ago after having my own health disaster. I had cancer, and I spent lost a kidney, but I spent a few years learning about cancer. How can I treat it? How can I reverse it? How can I prevent it? And I wrote a book about it. It was called Ultra Prevention. Well, a few years later, I realized I was middle-aged. I had survived my cancer. I wanted to live a long, healthy life, so I researched what it took to live longer. And I wrote a book, Ultra Longevity. So now I was thinking, well, maybe I could lose a few pounds. And so I started investigating more about what I could do because of curiosity. So some of the curiosities is that, different bodies had different health outcomes, and that is people that were shaped differently, maybe had a big butt or skinny legs, actually predicted where somebody would be headed in terms of their health. So what we started doing is started scanning people, and we have had over 1 million visitors to Canyon Ranch in the last 30 years, and about half of those have gone through some kind of health program. So we've collected a lot of information, a lot of data. And what we started doing is scanning people. Not the kind of body scans that Alexander does where he looks at your pancreas, but just bone density scans that also tell us very much about someone's body fat. And this is called a DEXA scan. It actually tells us where the fat is located on different people. So as we started scanning these people, we noticed that people really had different sort of body shapes and body types. They really stored fat in different places, and they, as a result, had different types of health issues and health outcomes. And so when we started looking at this data, we realized that where somebody stored fat where they stored energy, predicted their health outcomes. And not that that could be changed, because a lot of people think, if you want to lose belly fat, you go in the gym and do some sit-ups. Of course, that doesn't work. It helps you to lose weight overall, but it doesn't really get rid of that belly fat. If you want to get rid of the belly fat, you've just got to lose fat overall. So we scanned actually over 4,000 people. We've got over 2,000 women and 1,000 men. And we started plotting the different parameters of their body fat. And we found that, yes, as body fat went up, both the butt and belly went up. But we found some people that had bigger butts and some people that had bigger bellies. And as they got fatter, they sort of trended towards even body fat. Men and women, there's a slight difference. And then we looked at age, and there wasn't much of a change really in age. In women, men had a slight decline in this ratio of body fat in the belly to body fat in the butt. And we call that the butt-to-belly ratio. And it's an important metric because the butt-to-belly ratio tells us really where people are storing energy. And as you probably know, some people end up getting a big butt, other people get a big belly. And it's not a man-woman thing, it's really very individual. But it's very telling because we know we've linked this now with blood work. And what we did is on these people, we did blood work, like glucose levels, and we did diabetes checks, like a glucose tolerance test. We looked at their levels of insulin, how they metabolize sugar. We checked their cholesterol and their triglycerides, of course, the different particle sizes, the LDL, the HDL, the triglycerides. We looked at their vitamin D. They had stress tests and bone densities. And we started looking at this data and aggregating it, and what we found was very interesting. And that was that people in these different categories behaved very differently, and that is there were 2 or 3 very basic sort of humans. And as Alexander's shown us, there's the type here that has the belly fat, and there's the type here that has fat under the skin, but also more around in the butt. And what we found was the people who stored fat in the belly had higher blood sugars, they had higher insulin levels, they had higher levels of glucose, blood sugar, after we gave them a dose of sugar. They had lower levels of cholesterol relatively, higher levels of triglycerides, which is the other fat. They had lower levels of HDL and LDL. So a very different pattern, in fact, almost opposite patterns, as you could see, for these 6 or 7 different parameters. We didn't find much difference in CRP or particle size, but in these other 7 parameters, we did find significant differences between the people who stored fat in the belly and the people who had it under the skin and more around the butt. And so this was very interesting because we thought if we could personalize the diet, if we could make it more pertinent for that individual, maybe the person would have better success with weight loss and improve their health at the same time. And that was a great goal. Because as you know, people have had different success. It's not just about losing weight, it's also about improving your health. And that's one of our big pushes, of course, is we want to really improve and control so many of these cardiovascular risk factors. So what we found, there were also, and Alexander's helped with this, and if you look at where the fat is stored, you can see here, this is a person who has fat under the skin. And this is sort of my body type. I know if I pinch here, and I pinch here, and I pinch here, it all sort of pinches about the same. And when I go through the DEXA scanner, it tells me, yeah, my body fat is completely uniform. It's exactly even, and it's located here under my skin. That's different than a person like this who has, look at this fat inside the belly, and you can't pinch that fat because you can pinch this, but you can't pinch that because it's what we call visceral fat. It's not just under the skin, it's actually inside the abdominal cavity. It's surrounding the organs in the belly. It's surrounding the gut and the bowel and the pancreas and the liver. It's encasing those organs, and that's a very different type of fat storage. That's what we call, again, visceral fat. And you can see the difference between the visceral fat here and the subcutaneous fat, or the fat under the skin. Now, I've also had a number of personal observations in terms of the differences between these people that I think are helpful, although we still need to do some work to scientifically validate all of these points. But what I found is that people who have belly fat are very slow to get hungry. They just don't get hungry much. These are the people who go all day long. They really don't have much hunger. They get home at night and they'll start to eat, but not because they're hungry, but because they haven't eaten anything all day and it's dinner time. And I think part of the reason why they tend to have less hunger is these people have, remember, higher blood sugar. Higher blood sugar. So if you maintain a higher blood sugar, you're going to be less apt to be hungry. Now, the people who had more hip and butt fat were much quicker to hunger. They were going 4 hours and getting hungry and needing something. And this is really important because when somebody goes too long without eating, and their blood sugar tends to drop, as these people do, when they finally get to food, their goal is to get that blood sugar back up. So what you'll find is the people who have lower blood sugar and more frequent hunger, when they get to food, they're going to be eating too fast. They want to get that blood sugar back up. So these are the people who inhale their food. The food goes down so quickly. When you're sitting around the table, some people are just getting a fork in it, other people are already done. And those, of course, are the people who have more of the butt and leg fat. The people with the more belly fat can take their time about eating. And since that fat that accumulates under the skin, you know what that's called, cellulite, the group over here is going to have much more cellulite than the group who stores more belly fat. Now, when they get down to the pool, we also can distinguish these people because the people who have more butt and leg fat float like a board. The legs are right up, the feet are out of the water. They can almost walk on water. And the people who have more belly fat, they have less leg fat. They float like a jellyfish. The legs hang down. And you've probably seen, people like this, and the belly's sticking out, and the legs are hanging way down. That's more of the jellyfish kind of float. And as soon as we get them in the pool, we can distinguish these two groups right away because we can tell, the feet are up, the feet are down. We know which category you're in. Sugar has a big effect, and for these people over here with belly fat, sugar is like a drug. They get addicted to it. They have to have it. The more they have, the more they want. The more they want, the more they need. The more they need, the worse they get. And for them, the solution to losing weight is really breaking this sugar habit, this sugar addiction that they tend to have. And what we do is, we'll send them to Betty Ford because the only thing you can do is go through rehab. The other people, on the other hand, are kind of wary of sugar because they know if they eat just sugar, an hour or two later, they're going to have low blood sugar, and that's actually going to make them feel worse. So it's it's a bit scary for somebody in this category to just be eating sugar because, again, we found through glucose tolerance testing, if they get sugar, their blood sugar an hour or two later is low. So it actually drives more appetite. When belly fat people have a drink, they want another drink. That's what they want. One drink, alcohol has a hypoglycemic effect for most people, but since their blood sugar is already high, they've had a drink, they're just going to go for another. On the other side, having a drink makes them want to eat something. So they have a drink, their blood sugar drops, next thing you know, they want an hors d'oeuvre. So it changes the location of where you find these people. You find these people at the bar, and you find these people around the hors d'oeuvre table. So at any party, they sort of segregate out by themselves. You can see who the belly fat and who the leg fat people are. And there's a big difference in the diseases. Over here, we're getting a lot of diabetes, we're getting cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, we're having strokes, heart attacks. That's where these people are headed. On the other side, of course, cancer. And that's because you've got to die from something. And if you're not going to have a heart attack, you're not going to have high blood pressure or diabetes, you're going to get cancer. Statistically, it's not that they have an increased risk of cancer, it's just that statistically these people have to break out. So I've started to think about these people in two very different ways, and that is this category as the hunter, and this category as the farmer. And that's because, if you think about it, hunters and farmers, had completely different access to food. The hunters were nomadic. They would follow the herd, or they would follow the resources. They would be foraging in an area. Once that area is depleted, they would move on. A hunter has an advantage in certain times because, and these are the people that will become diabetic, remember. So they're going to run a higher blood sugar. And that's good if it's a long time between food. Because if you're not going to get to food for a while, you want to keep your blood sugar up. So if your blood sugar's high, you're going to be able to survive to go forage or find food or go get it. So these hunters have an advantage. And again, these are the diabetics. In our country right now, 40% of Americans are either diabetic or pre-diabetic. 40%. And you say, well, if something's so dangerous, why is it so prevalent? And the answer is that diabetes has a very strong selection advantage. It's good to be diabetic if food is scarce. If food is scarce and times are lean, you want to be diabetic because you want to be able to keep your blood sugar up so you can go find some food. Whereas the farmers, if times are lean and food is scarce, they're going away. And that's because their blood sugar is dropping down low. Now, a farmer, of course, is very much different. Farmers did what? They grew crops. They grew grains. So the farmers were stationary. They had their fields. They grew their crops. They stored up extra for the winter, for the drought, for the lean time. So they always had some food on hand. And they grew grain. So they grew corn, they grew rice, they grew wheat, they grew grains. And the farmers would store these grains up and always to have some food accessible. And they grew a surplus, of course, to feed their families in the village, etc. But they always had some food available. And that's the most important strategy for the farmer type. Because if a farmer goes more than about 3 hours without eating something, their blood sugar drops. And of course, if they're trying to lose weight, they think, oh, I should not eat because I'm trying to control my weight. And of course, then by the time they get to food, blood sugar's too low, they're going to overeat and eat too fast. So this becomes a behavior problem in the group of people who store fat in their legs and butt. So we have a very different population of people. We have different strategies. And my strategy here for the hunters is we've got to break the addiction to sugar. And when I say sugar, I also mean, grains and carbohydrates, the things that a hunter wouldn't have access to. If you're a hunter and you're a nomad and you're foraging, you're not going to have corn, you're not going to have wheat, you're not going to have rice, you're not going to have access to grains. And when we look at these people, they really do not tolerate these kinds of foods. They really just don't tolerate the grains at all. So we try to reduce the grain intake in the hunter group. The farmers, exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite. And that is the farmers need the grain. They have to have that grain because they got to get their blood sugar back up. They're trying to, cure their hunger, but also not to overeat. So my rule for the farmers is never go 2 hours without eating something, and it's usually some kind of grain. Because if you're a farmer, you know that if you're hungry, an apple just doesn't really do it. But a cracker does, or a piece of bread, or a little bit of, maybe a pretzel or something. All you need is a little bit. So never be more than arm's length away from a grain. So just to back up again, remember, the farmers are going to have lower blood sugar levels. They're going to have lower triglyceride levels. They're going to have higher cholesterol, but also higher good cholesterol, a lot more of the HDL cholesterol. So that's a very different pattern than the hunter, who's going to have a low HDL, low cholesterol, high triglycerides, and a higher blood sugar. Now, you're probably wondering, well, what happens when a hunter marries a farmer? And the answer is, first of all, it's hard to have dinner because she's eating that and he's eating that, and how do you really eat at home? Well, you don't. You go out. They can each order what you want. But their kids, of course, are going to have some blending of these two traits, and of course that's very normal for some people to have features of both the hunter and the farmer. Maybe you've got high triglycerides and a high HDL. It's possible. So right now, it's roughly a third, and a third in the middle. And so how does this really affect our dietary strategies? Well, in this study that came out of the archives in 2006, showed that it actually was a meta-analysis. It compared 5 of the top diets to see really what worked and what didn't. And what they found was, after a year, both the low-carb and the low-fat diet were equal in terms of weight loss across this population. But 2 other things are very important. The low-fat diet was better at lowering cholesterol, especially the LDL cholesterol. But the low-carb diet was better at lowering triglycerides and better at raising the HDL. So it makes sense, of course, because these things over here, if we go on, you can see that that's what we want to see over here, is this person, of course, has higher triglycerides and a lower HDL. The low-carb diet makes much more sense here. And on the low-fat side, of course, you're going to see someone who has a high cholesterol, and they have a high HDL, so they have low triglycerides, so that's the low-fat diet for the person who's in the farmer category. So by using this approach, what we're able to do is really personalize the diet. And you say, well, what about the rest of the people? What about the blends? Well, the perfect diet for the people who have the blend is the Mediterranean diet. So the Mediterranean diet actually makes much more sense for people in the middle. So here we have 3 diets. We've got a low-fat diet, we've got the Mediterranean diet, and we've got the low-carb diet. And by doing this kind of analysis, by looking at a very few parameters like the location of body fat, by looking at someone's blood sugar, cholesterol, triglycerides, and HDL, you can immediately know which diet would suit someone best. If they're clearly on the farmer side, it's going to be a low-carb diet. A low-fat diet. If it's clearly on the hunter side, you've got a low-carb diet. And in the middle, we've got a Mediterranean diet. So as this paper said, the Mediterranean low-carbohydrate diets may be an effective alternative to low-fat diets. The more favorable effects on lipids and glycemic control of the Mediterranean diet sets personal preferences, and metabolic considerations might inform individualized tailoring of dietary interventions. I can imagine a solution to obesity where people are able to easily learn which way of eating is best for them. Thanks very much.